Welcome to Libretto 101, a program where we discover things you should know before visiting a production at the theater, because it will be much more interesting that way. I'm Maria Khoreva, ballerina of the Mariinsky Theater, and your host for today. Nutcracker. Today we'll talk about it. Read the libretto and think about the hidden meanings. Watch from the audience and take a peek from the backstage. Get acquainted if you're not already, or get to know each other better. It'll be my point of view though, but maybe it'll encourage you to buy a ticket to ballet and watch it with your own eyes. So let's start. Libretto. Act 1. The action takes place in an old German town at the start of the last century. Night is falling. It is Christmas Eve, and the streets are busy and festive. Drosselmeyer, an eccentric inventor and toy maker loved by children, is among those invited to see the Christmas tree and the large, brightly lit house of Stahlbaum. The living room in Stahlbaum's house is beautifully decorated. The guests assemble. Drosselmeyer enters carrying presents. The party is ready to start. The children rush in. There's a game of blind man's buff, and Drosselmeyer takes part. He's blindfolded. Masha, Stahlbaum's young daughter, is the first to be caught. After the games, there is dancing. Now, dressed as a magician, Drosselmeyer does magic tricks and puts on a puppet show. The Mouse King wishes to kidnap the princess, but the courageous Nutcracker kills the Mouse King and saves the princess. Drosselmeyer's ideas seem inexhaustible. He makes clockwork toys, including a clown, a doll, and a Moor dance for the children. The Nutcracker, however, is Masha's favorite. Franz takes the Nutcracker from Masha, and the head comes off in his hands. Drosselmeyer quickly mends the Nutcracker. Masha cuddles and comforts her damaged favorite. It is late, and the guests must depart. The party comes to an end with some dances. Masha says goodnight to the Nutcracker, and the candles on the tree are extinguished. Masha's nanny takes her to her bed. Act 2. Masha goes to bed and falls asleep. She dreams that mice have taken over the living room. They are headed by the Mouse King. The Nutcracker leads the tin soldiers in the attack. Masha follows him. Overcoming her fear, she throws her slipper at the Mouse King at a decisive point in the battle, thus saving the Nutcracker. The Mouse King has been defeated and disappears together with his troops. Drosselmeyer turns Masha and the Nutcracker into a beautiful prince and princess. They are caught up in a blizzard, and their journey to a fairy tale land begins. Act 3. Masha and the Nutcracker are sailing along a magical river. The Nutcracker drives away some bats and clears the way to an enchanted island. Celebrations begin. Masha and the Nutcracker are delighted. They dance and celebrate with the others. Epilogue. Masha is asleep in bed. It will soon be morning. Her magical dream is over. Masha awakes. So, this was a libretto, a synopsis of a show that you can see at the Mariinsky Theater. The thing about the Nutcracker ballets is that probably almost in every theater you see a different production, and there are a lot of versions, but they're all pretty similar, maybe just with an exception of some details. While with some other classical ballets, I would want to start explaining what is happening on stage, because sometimes you cannot really understand some pantomime scenes, some of the dialogues between the main characters, or just, who is whom on stage. But I think in Nutcracker, it is this kind of ballet, and maybe one and only ballet like this, that almost everything is super clear. At least when you know the names of all of the characters, everything happens very smoothly. There's almost no pantomime, and since we all know the story of the Nutcracker from our childhood, I think pretty much everyone is at least acquainted with the characters of this ballet and characters of this fairy tale. everything is clear. So I think there's no point in me explaining what is happening on stage, since it's also a fact that every different theater has the different version of the Nutcracker. But today, I wanted to maybe drive our attention to a little bit of a different field, which is the hidden meanings, the story of the creation of this ballet. And practically, I wanted us to think together why this ballet is a symbol of Christmas, a symbol of the New Year's. It has almost exceeded the borders, exceeded the boundaries of ballet art and went into the masses. That's how popular it is. And I wanted us to think together, why is it like the first ballet, maybe competing with Swan Lake? Why is it so popular and why is it so quintessential for our culture? First thing I wanted to talk about is the synopsis, the literature base, which is the Hoffmann's novel, Nutcracker and the Mouse King. And Hoffmann is a German writer, novelist, and romanticist. So it is a beautiful, beautiful base for the ballet, but probably if you know this fairy tale, if you know the original Hoffmann's novel, you noticed that in the synopsis for the ballet, a lot of the details, a lot of the synopsis is skipped, and I wanted to read to you kind of a shortened version of what is skipped from Hoffmann's original novel. So basically, in ballet, everything happens in one night, but in the novel, everything happens over the course of several days. And the one thing that is skipped is the story about Nutcracker turning into the Nutcracker, about Drosselmeyer's nephew turning into this ugly doll, and about the Princess Pirlipat and the Nutcracker Took. So I'll just read it for you. Mary wakes up in her bed the next morning with her arm bandaged and tries to tell her parents about the battle between the mice and dolls, but they do not believe her. Several days later, Drosselmeyer arrives with the Nutcracker, whose jaw has been fixed, and tells Mary the story of Princess Pirlipat and Madame Mauserings, known as the Queen of the Mice, which explains how Nutcrackers came to be and why they look the way they do. The Mouse Queen tricked Pirlipat's mother into allowing her and her children to gobble up the lard that was supposed to go into the sausage that the king was to eat at the dinner. The king, enraged at the Mouse Queen for spoiling his supper and upsetting his wife, had his court inventor, also named Drosselmeyer, create traps for the Mouse Queen and her children. The Mouse Queen, angered at the death of her children, swore that she would take revenge on Pirlipat. Pirlipat's mother surrounded her with cats, which were supposed to be kept awake by being constantly stroked. The nurses who did so fell asleep, however, and the Mouse Queen magically turned Pirlipat ugly, giving her a huge head, a wide grinning mouth, and a cottony beard like a nutcracker. The king blamed Drosselmeyer and gave him 4 weeks to find a cure. He went to his friend, the court astrologer. They read Pirlipat's horoscope and told the king that the only way to cure her was to have her eat the Nutcracker Took, which must be cracked and handed to her by a man who had never been shaved nor worn boots since birth, and who must, without opening his eyes, hand her the kernel and take 7 steps backwards without stumbling. The king sent Drosselmeyer and the astrologer out to look for both. The 2 men journeyed for many years without finding either the nut or the man, until finally they returned home to Nuremberg and found the nut with Drosselmeyer's cousin, a puppet maker. His son turned out to be the young man needed to crack the Nutcracker Took. The king promised Pirlipat's hand to whoever could crack the nut. Many men broke their teeth on it before Drosselmeyer's nephew cracked it easily and handed it to Pirlipat, who swallowed it and immediately became beautiful again. But Drosselmeyer's nephew, on his 7th backward step, stepped on the Mouse Queen and stumbled, and the curse fell on him, giving him a large head, wide mouth, and cottony beard, making him a nutcracker. The ungrateful and unsympathetic Pirlipat seeing how ugly he had become, refused to marry him and banished him from the castle. Mary, while she recuperates from her wound, hears the Mouse King, son of the deceased Madame Mouserings, whispering to her in the middle of the night, threatening to bite the Nutcracker to pieces unless she gives him her sweets and dolls. She sacrifices all of them, but he wants more and more. Finally, the Nutcracker tells her that if she gets him a sword, she will kill the Mouse King. Fritz gives her the one from his toy hussars. The next night, the Nutcracker comes into Mary's room bearing the Mouse King's 7 crowns and takes her to the doll kingdom, where she sees wonderful things. She falls asleep in the Nutcracker's palace and is brought home. She tries to tell her mother what happened, but again she is not believed, even when she shows her parents the 7 crowns, and is forbidden to speak of her dreams anymore. Mary sits in front of the toy cabinet one day while Drosselmeyer is repairing one of her father's clocks. She swears to the Nutcracker that if he were ever really real, she would never behave as Pirlipat did and would love him whatever he looked like. At this, there is a bang, and she faints and falls off the chair. Her mother comes in to tell that Drosselmeyer's nephew has arrived from Nuremberg. He tells her that by swearing that she would love him in spite of all his looks, she broke the curse and made him human again. He asks her to marry him. She accepts, and in a year and a day he comes for her and takes her away from the doll kingdom, where she is crowned queen. So this is the skipped part and actually the finale of the tale. And for many years I have been asking myself why this part was not included, but let's figure out together. So actually, originally, the plan for Nutcracker was only to be a 2-act show. It was following the opera Iolanta, composed also by Tchaikovsky. So the original plan was to make an evening of opera combined with ballet. So that's why the original, creation was supposed to be quite short, and Tchaikovsky was writing not a lot of music for this. This ballet was supposed to be created by Marius Petipa, who was the chief choreographer of the Imperial Theaters in Russia. And he created his plan, and we even have the documentation of his comments to Tchaikovsky in archives. Notes to Tchaikovsky how much music to make and which music should be, for certain different parts of the novel. And Petipa had his plan. He absolutely omitted the story about Pirlipat and the Nutcracker Took and becoming Nutcracker and all of this stuff. Because, in my personal opinion, I think, it will be overpowering and it cannot really be staged nicely. So, Petipa had his plan, but even, judging by the comments and judging by the documentation that we have of him creating the plan for the ballet, we cannot really see what he meant by that, because of course Petipa's language was choreography. It so happened that Petipa's daughter tragically died just before he needed to start staging the ballet. So after some time after that, Petipa became seriously ill and he could not create the ballet. That's why Lev Ivanov, the second chief choreographer of the Imperial Theaters, who would a few years later create the magical white act of the Swan Lake, just 3 years later, if we are being precise, he stepped in instead of Petipa and started creating Nutcracker. And of course, Petipa had the plan, and Ivanov started creating the ballet according to this plan. And in Petipa's plan, there was only, some of the scheme, some of the points of the ballet, but Ivanov chose to create choreography with this plan and maybe skipping some of the Petipa's ideas that were meant to be in the original choreography for this ballet. Then Nutcracker is flat and not as interesting, you would say, as Hoffmann's original, but I would want to argue with you a little bit if you are thinking like this, because it is still exceeding the maybe flat at the first glance, simple fairy tale-ish synopsis. So, of course, Tchaikovsky's music. And I need to mention that Tchaikovsky was facing several difficulties throughout the whole creation of this ballet. He was really thinking that Nutcracker is not even near to his other ballet creations. He didn't like composing ballets too much. He was more interested in creating operas, but he still was the first serious composer, the first symphonic composer who really valued ballet and who reformed the art of ballet, but that's a whole different story. But he was completely confident that Nutcracker was one of his worst creations and that it is not going well whatsoever. He was constantly telling everyone that the work is really not going well. At the beginning of him creating the score for Nutcracker, he stopped his very meaningful communication with Nadezhda von Meck, who was supporting him and financially and also psychologically, morally, and she was supporting his art, and it meant a lot for him. So the first kind of tragic thing that happened. And the second thing is that his sister also died. And that's when he stopped for a while creating Nutcracker and went to America. But going back from America, he was writing in one of his letters that the work started going better and faster. So we can see that probably in the score of Nutcracker, even though the synopsis was probably we don't know, because maybe Petipa meant something different, but synopsis is a little simple, but Tchaikovsky definitely put a lot of thoughts into it, and we can hear this in the music. Secondly, I wanted to mention that Tchaikovsky and Hoffmann have a lot in common in their art, in their artistic expression in this world. Even though Tchaikovsky lived quite some time past the Romanticism era, I still think that he has a lot of romantic ideas in his music. And both Hoffmann and Tchaikovsky were speaking about this fantastic world that is, that is inside the human, that is inside the human soul. And they were both psychological, but Tchaikovsky even more so. His music was always, of course, very illustrative, because it is, giving all sorts of different landscapes and beautiful nature and beautiful scenery, but also his music is super psychological and has us looking inside of our, souls. So Hoffmann was also portraying this kind of things in his novels, such as fantasy world that can only be seen by the chosen ones. And the society does not really accept these chosen ones, and they're falling out of the society. But the true loving and the true kind people will always accept people with their strange sides and strange look on this world, because you can never know what is happening inside the human soul. So I think this fantasy world, this world of human soul, is really giving a lot in common in Tchaikovsky and Hoffmann, and I think this collaboration gave the world something magical, because they really united this beautiful tale by Hoffmann, supported by Tchaikovsky music that is really giving, the quintessential miracle. And that is one of the reasons why Nutcracker became so popular and touched so many hearts. So really just everything came together, and the fact that it is all connected to Christmas, I think the most people really believe in miracle around Christmas. So not around any other celebrations, but really Christmas, the quintessential holiday, the quintessential celebration where we all kind of believe in something transcendental. So connecting this all to Christmas gave us miracle a true miracle that is perfectly justified. And that is while seeing Nutcracker on stage, we all kind of get immersed into that miracle. Speaking of justifying stuff, in Nutcracker, not only the miracle in the synopsis is justified, as much as possible. Even if you don't believe in miracles, you would still kind of be prone to believing in Nutcracker. If you don't believe in Nutcracker, you wouldn't believe anywhere else. But in Nutcracker, not only miracle, but also dance is justified. So in some other classical and non-classical ballets, you could think, like, why would this person even dance? There's no point. Of course, usually it happens smoothly, but sometimes it doesn't really make any sense. But for the people that are skeptical towards the art of ballet, it would be inconvenient to see some characters dancing. In Nutcracker, however, think about it. Like, it's a Christmas Eve party in the first act. Everyone should dance, of course, because it's this era. It's the 19th century, so it's all perfectly justified. The kids dance because kids dance always. Drosselmeyer even is a teacher of dance in some versions. So, and then in the act 2 and 3, snowflakes, they dance because if we look at the snowflakes like this, they are always moving, they're in movement, they're turning, they are falling, so dance of the snowflakes, obvious. Then in the celebration, in the divertissement of the act 3, again, everyone dances because it is celebration. And the classical pas de deux of Masha, the princess and Nutcracker, the prince, is also justified because the classical choreography in this pas de deux is really giving the flight of the soul, is really lifting us to this other level, to the level of the soul, not the body. So connected to this heavenly music, it is again only right to dance to this music and express the soul. So it is a perfect ballet in a way, a perfect story for the ballet and the perfect scenario for the ballet. And that's why we go back to Petipa creating a simpler plot, but it worked greatly. It worked to the great advantage to the ballet in the whole. And in a way also, like in some cultures at least, in European culture, I think we can safely say that ballerina somehow more or less equals princess. So in my mind at least, like being a ballerina equals being a princess in this world in a way. So even this transformation of Masha from the childish dances to the classical, beautiful, pristine classical choreography is this transformation of the character from being a girl to being an adult and a princess. Going back to the history of this ballet, the first staging by Lev Ivanov was not really accepted nicely. And even in 1920s, after the revolution in Russia, this ballet wasn't staged for a few years, because it was not considered one of the genius ballets as some others. But nevertheless, the music attracted so many people that the choreographers all over the world, in Russia and in Europe, decided to make their own versions, the versions that were modernized and some meanings were added. And Nutcracker in the 20th century became really a symbol for Christmas and symbol for miracle, I think. Nutcracker is also a perfect textbook romance. This is another cause for his popularity. Masha and Nutcracker Prince are like yin and yang together to each other. Masha is feminine and fragile, and Nutcracker is brave and strong. So, for every soul, I think we all sometimes need this simple but very beautiful story. So every time I hear the music for the Nutcracker, I tend to start crying a little bit because it is the definition of something magical for me. I think that is it for today. That is it for today's podcast. Let me know what you think about it, and I hope you get a chance to see the Nutcracker at the theaters and get this festive atmosphere of a miracle. Thank you for listening or watching the Libretto 101, and I will see you in the next episodes. Somewhere in here, in this winter wonderland, should be Stahlbaum's house. Do you know how to get there? No? Then let's go. I'll show you.